We get to guide our kids. We get to discover alongside them what are their gifts, talents, and abilities. How has God naturally wired them? And as we spoke in our last conversation about what are some things that God really needs to work in their hearts. And so we can focus on those, but we can also focus on the really good things.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am back with my new friend, Leigh Nguyen, and we're talking about homeschooling because, you know, it's a homeschool podcast and that's what we talk about here. And if you missed Monday's episode, go back and listen to that. We talked about just kind of setting the stage for homeschooling, what that looks like for maybe someone who's just getting into homeschooling. We talked about character development and habit training. And these are all things that we deal with as homeschool parents. And so it was a great episode. Go back and listen. Today, I want to talk a little bit more about like how to really focus in on creating an individualized education for our kids and just some practical day-to-day tips to accomplish what it is that we are doing with our kids and how to get things done that we need to get done. But before we get into our conversation, I want to say thank you again to our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. We're going to talk about curriculum today. So if you're looking for a great curriculum for any subject, any age, any grade, check out bjupresshomeschool.com. They are trustworthy in everything that they do. You guys know that we love them. We've used them throughout the years for many different subjects, and they're amazing. They will really help your child to develop a strong biblical worldview. So check them out at bjupresshomeschool.com. And if you're not sure what you need for your kids, you can always call them up and talk to one of their consultants who will help walk you through it. bjupresshomeschool.com. Well, Leigh, welcome back to the podcast. I am so glad to have you back with me today. Let's talk about creating an individualized education because you've got 3 kids and you're kind of nearing the end. You said your youngest is 16. And so you've got a few years left, but you've already graduated too. And every kid is so different. I think it's one of the most exciting things about having kids, but it's also one of the hardest things about homeschooling is that our kids don't just fit in a box, right? Every one of them is different. They're all unique. They have their different learning styles. They have their different talents. So how, with your kids, did you go about creating an individualized education for each one of them that really worked for them?
Well, let's go back and start at the beginning when I first started homeschooling. And everybody got their own age range for every subject. And because that's just what you think. You have to do first grade history and third grade history, and the preschooler just kind of rolled around and tried not to get into trouble. And so we continued with that. And I realized we don't need to do all of those things. I mean, granted, it helped the budget to cut some of those things out, but we just are so overwhelmed by homeschooling especially when we first start in the first handful of years that we just need all of this different stuff and that we have to have certain grades for every single thing. Now, that probably works well with language arts and math. I'm a big proponent of that. Get what will work for them. It doesn't even have to be the grade that they're quote unquote in at that time, but just really looking at it then, like, what do you want to study? So an individualized way also as a family. So what do you want to study for history this year? Nobody says you have to, in 5th grade, study the Revolutionary War. Maybe you did that a couple of years ago because they really wanted to do it. And so I think when it comes to individualize with kids, we don't have to just stick to what a curriculum is saying that we have to do for that age range. So think outside the box, because again, like you said, we can't put them in a box and they're all different. Even if we did put them in a box, they'd be different shaped boxes, right? And different sizes, and they would just be very different. And which can be overwhelming, especially in the younger years when there's just so much every day. There's meals, there's snacks, there's places to get, there's getting everybody dressed, there's getting naps, there's getting baths, there's all the things that have to happen. And so you might think, how am I going to do such an individualized? Well, focus on the math and the language arts, and then just let the younger ones, just let them play. If their science is digging in the mud outside and they're finding worms and they're asking about the birds, then that's perfect. I found that as they got older, just creating an individualized education was fun. Yeah. It was fun to be able to see them really dive into things. And it just, again, as we start off, and just found so overwhelming. And when we want to look at maybe some long range planning, like we had talked about, and our vision, we have to remember that we get to homeschool our kids. This isn't a drag. This is something that we get to do. We get to spend all these years. These years that we're with them it's not wasted. And we're going to look back. I look back now and I'm like, it was intense. There was a lot, and there was emotions and up and down, but I'm so glad for all of that time. And so we get to guide our kids. We get to discover alongside them, what are their gifts, talents, and abilities? How has God naturally wired them? And as we spoke in our last conversation about what are some things that God really needs to work in their hearts. And so we can focus on those, but we can also focus on the really good things. I have kids, 3 kids that are just they're all vastly different. You might have one that's really good at arts and fine arts and maybe whatever falls under all the arts. I'm thinking like, she likes dance and watercolor and all these things she just naturally taught herself. And then I have a kiddo who loves business stuff. And then I have one who loves building and creating and engineering. And they're just so different. But how exciting that we get to help them discover those. How many of us left high school and didn't really understand ourselves, how God wired us? And so we had to take some time to try to discover ourselves. Imagine if kiddos, I say kiddos, they're, even though they're 18, leaving their time of homeschool, whether they're staying home, going to college or getting a job or whatever they're doing beyond that. Imagine if they understand how they're wired, they understand how they learn.
Yeah.
How amazing would that be if you get to go out and know, well, I'm actually learn really well by reading something, or I learn really well kinesthetically, whatever. There we go. With my hands, understanding that instead of feeling like something's wrong with you because you're not learning it well from a book, you learn better by doing. And so we get to then spend some time. And I have found that kids, they'll get really into something and they could be really into something for a while and they end up, all of a sudden one day they'll say, I'm done with that. And you're like, well, we didn't get as far as I thought, because they feel like they've mastered it for the age that they are. Maybe they're 10 and they've mastered that. And they've mastered maybe getting really into horses or something, or horseback riding. My daughter was into that for a few years and then we moved and I said, so she's like, no, I'm done with that. I was like, okay, I guess we're going to move on. So we get to spend the time, pull along the resources that they're really interested in. And I think a lot of times we think we can't do this in high school. I think high school is the perfect time to really dive into what they're interested in and how can we pull along resources and people. How can we get them matched up with people that have the same interests and to spend time with and to learn from those people.
Yeah. Yeah. When we watch our kids grow into really who they are and who God made them to be, it's really fun to ask them, what is it that you want to do? Because in the early years, of course, we're dictating all of the things. This is what you're going to do. This is the curriculum you're going to use. And this is the direction we're going to go with your learning. And even with, we talked about character development on Monday, but even with character development, as they get older, we can say, what are some things that you're struggling with as far as character? What are some of those fruits of the Spirit that you want to grow in? And sometimes as parents, we might need to say, okay, let me just tell you, these are the things you need to grow in. But it's fun to involve them in that because it gives them the chance to make the decisions for their own lives. And then we can help guide them and direct them into making wise choices and good decisions. And, again, man, it's just such a great privilege to be able to do that with our kids. And I love that you talk about that we get to do this, because oftentimes as parents, we think we have to do this, or it just seems like a drag. Parenting can kind of seem like a drag. Homeschooling can seem like a drag sometimes, right? We get tired, we're overwhelmed, we're weary, all the things. And instead of having that attitude of, I have another day that I have to get through with homeschooling, it's waking up and saying, this is the day that the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it because I get to do this with my kids. I get to be the one who speaks life into them and who walks alongside them in their journey of growing up and growing into who God made them to be. And it's fun, but it's hard. It's not for the faint of heart.
Exactly.
It is definitely a challenge. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. We want to thank all our sponsors for making this show possible. BJU Press Homeschool, CTC Math, and Apologia. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. Visit the show notes for links to these great companies and thank them for supporting the Schoolhouse Rocks podcast. We are back with Leigh. Let's talk about just practical tips on how to accomplish homeschooling on a day-to-day basis, because I know that this is something that every homeschool mom at some point has to face. And we probably face it in a different way every year because as our kids are growing, the needs are changing. How do we get it all done? And I don't mean all done because obviously, we've talked about that so many times. We can't possibly get it all done. We can't do all the things, all the housekeeping, all the family, all the relationships, all the church stuff, and all the homeschooling and academics. But just focusing on the academics, how can we in a practical way get done what we need to get done in a day?
First, I love that you said that every year is different, because it really is. And we have to remember that, because there's some years that are going to be harder. There's going to be some years where you have maybe a wide range and you have a lot of kids that you're homeschooling. And I remember the years where I had elementary, middle, and high school, or just even elementary to middle school. And it was just, there was a lot. And as they get older, they become more independent, and it wasn't as much. So there are going to be years that are going to feel harder. And maybe this year that you're in right now is hard. Maybe next year won't be hard. It might still be hard, but just know that putting in that time of the hard will get you to the point where it doesn't feel as hard and you become more used to it. So really just some practical things is, when it comes to curriculum, focus on math and language arts for each kiddo. If you don't accomplish the other things, it's okay. You will. And a lot of times, I hate to say this, but I went through history with my youngest with the other two, and he doesn't remember any of it through the elementary years. So we're like, okay, we got to do it over again. So it's just, sometimes we get so much into our own brains, and we think that if they don't learn about these certain things and these certain wars and the battles and all this stuff, that they're not going to, that at 18, that they're going to be not good in society or something like that. Yeah. But just focus on those and know that if we add too much, we have too much in our day, we're not going to accomplish everything. And then we're going to feel at the end of the day a little bit like a failure. Going to go to bed at night and say, I didn't accomplish everything. We didn't get all the curriculum done. I'm a terrible homeschool mom. And that is absolutely not even true. Yeah. So really pare down on what you're going to get, especially now as you're maybe looking for the next homeschool year. Just purchase the math and the language arts and know that you can add in those other subjects as the year goes on. So a couple of things though. Let's talk about the math. I love to just do math first thing, like ASAP in the morning. Like, let's just get that done. For some reason, math tends to evoke tears. I don't know if it was like that in your family and in your home. I don't know. But it tends to be something that kids get stressed out about. Not all kids, but I feel like most kids do. Yeah. So if you can get the math lessons done first thing in the morning, I tended to allow my kids to do some of it on their own if they were up and I'm still making breakfast, and they became a little bit more diligent because they knew that if they got that done, it would feel good. And then the sooner they got that done, we'd accomplish our other stuff, and then they would be free for the rest of the day. So they could get up in the morning and get themselves ready, and while I'm making breakfast, they could go ahead and work on some of the review for their math. And I was totally okay with that. I found that it is helpful to plan out a week at a time. For me, maybe it's just my brain. I just couldn't focus on the entire year. I would gather curriculum and resources and things I wanted to use, but I couldn't map out an entire year sitting down sometime in August and planning out for September through June. Just, because there's so many variables, things come up, right? So I found that just planning 1 week at a time. So on Sundays, I would sit down, I would take a look. I could look at the weeks, know what was going on. I'm like, okay, well, we have dentist appointments on this certain day. Well, that's completely going to alter the course of that day, and take a look at what do we have going on and just plan out that week around our family life. Yeah. And that just really eased it up. Like, okay, just 1 week at a time, just really looking at 1 week at a time, and then looking at 1 day at a time. Then I always then would set up the night before. I still do that. Last night, I was just doing that myself when I have a 16-year-old who could very easily do it. And he did set it up. I still kind of just double check to make sure. Just get out the resources, get out everything that maybe you're going to need for that just the night before, so that the next morning you're not scrambling and trying to get those things together and finding this and finding that, because it just makes it a little bit more hectic. So just setting up the night before.
Can we pause there for just a second? Okay. So as you're doing your planning, do you use a checklist for your kids and you're homeschooling one now, but do you use a checklist for them? You started out at the beginning of the week and say, okay, here's what I want you to accomplish on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, and go from there? Or is it, this is what I want you to accomplish for the whole week? Do it however it works out best for you. Have you found an easy way to do that?
For me, maybe it's just my personality. Maybe I'm a little type A as well. I found it better just to go day by day. Yeah. And they also appreciated that too, just understanding, and also their personalities, knowing what they can accomplish instead of requiring a child to do something who maybe isn't a very quick reader and doesn't comprehend as fast. To have them read 20 pages in a history book is not going to. So why don't we just do a couple at a time? And so, so just a week. And I think that work can work great for some kids and some families to give like, this week, I want you to accomplish this. So I have nothing against that way of doing it. It was just me just being a little bit more picky about it. And as they have gotten older, I've tried to give that to them. And I will be honest, and my daughter, I could give that to her by high school and she would write out what she needed to do and get it done. My boys they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't sit down and kind of figure it out. And they just kind of would wing it. We wouldn't get things done. So I still do it for my high schooler. And then he just accomplishes it. It's just understanding kids and setting everybody up for success.
Sure. Which, we're going to talk a little bit later, probably tomorrow, about helping our kids to become entrepreneurs. But there definitely are two different mindsets. You've got the entrepreneurial type, mentality, the kids who are just naturally born that way, who are the go-getters and they can get things done without always having to be told. And then you've got those who really do make better employees, if you will. And that's totally fine and okay. That's what most people are, but they're the ones who need to be told what to do and when to do it. And so one way is not better than the other. One way is not wrong. It's just that our kids are different. So yeah, that's fine. Okay. So let's move on from doing the weekly planning. You had another step there and I totally interrupted you.
No, that's fine. And yes, that's just setting up the evening before, just getting everything out, getting maybe the stack of books. So my 16-year-old's 10th grade, I just get out his stack of books and I flip in his notebook, his assignment book, just to the next page. And sometimes I know that things come up and I might make some adjustments. But I've just found that it just takes, if you do it for 5 minutes in the evening, it's so much faster than if you try to do it in the morning when the kids are up and they're hungry and the dog's barking and all this stuff is going on. It might take you 15, 20 minutes. But if you just do it in the evening, kids are all in bed, the house is quiet, and you just kind of step into your space, whether that's the dining room table or you have a homeschool room or it's the living room, wherever it is, just take a moment to look over. Maybe you don't do what I do with the assignment notebook and have different books. Maybe just kind of taking a look over what is maybe a plan or what can you do? What do you have lined up for the next day? And just getting, I think, into our minds what's going on the next day. And then we can just the next day get up and just implement that.
Yeah. Do you have a specific place in your house where you keep everything ready for your son? Like for us, we have a bookcase, and on that bookcase, we have a specific shelf, and that's where I keep all of our curriculum that we're using currently, and the books that we're reading currently, that it all goes on that shelf. I know Christy Clover, she uses, a file box. And she'll even tear out the pages of, like, if her kids are doing a textbook, she'll tear out the pages of the textbook and put them in different file folders for her kids. And it's all organized that way. How do you organize your curriculum so that your son knows, okay, here's what's next?
So this looks very different because now I'm just down to one. Right. I guess this is maybe my second year with just one kiddo. I graduated my older son a year early. So we're down to the second year with him. And so it looks different. I've had homeschool rooms. I've had homeschool corners. I've had part of a finished basement and where we had just bookshelves and an actual dining room table that we sat around and did it. So I've had all kinds of different scenarios. And I think that kind of went, we've also lived in multiple homes. So each of those places fits with a certain home and how that would work for us. So at this point now, we actually do have what I call the homeschool nook. It was off of our kitchen and we moved here 5 years ago. I was like, I don't know what we're going to use this for. I was like, oh, wait, I know. We're going to use it for homeschool. We just put some tables in there and have some floating shelves. And I liked having everything all in one place. And even though there was no door to that space, I could just walk away on the weekends and not have to think about it until Sunday afternoon when I would sit down for maybe a half an hour and kind of plan out the week. At this point now, I'm like, we don't need the homeschool nook anymore. And now I have a fun little space I get to do some DIY stuff in. So we have an extra space now off of our living room that we call our library. My husband just built some shelves. And so I've just been using that to store his stuff. And I have a table in there and he loves it. He loves kind of just going in there and just by himself, just kind of working on his stuff. And I can see him and peek in at him. And then we get together and we do our morning time. I still do morning time with him. Yeah. And
do you read to him still?
I do.
I love that.
I do. I have found, we could do a whole episode just about morning time and how much just doing things together really, the relationships. And to be honest, I've learned a lot. We've done some amazing books and some amazing resources that I'm like, when's morning time? I'm excited to read this next chapter in the book or something.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I love that you read to your 16-year-old son. Because I think sometimes people think, oh, as they get older, they're not going to read with mom anymore. And, maybe if you didn't start it when they were young, it might be a little bit more difficult, but we're the same. I mean, I still read to my 18-year-old. It's so much fun. And it's exactly as you said, the relationship that we have built around reading books together is like none other. I mean, I think it is the greatest part of homeschooling. I love sitting on the couch with my girls. We were going through pictures recently of my oldest daughter because we were having to pull some senior pictures, pictures for her slideshow for her graduation. And so we were looking at some old pictures, and I have a picture of the three of us sitting on the couch together reading Beverly Cleary. And Lacey, my youngest, was little. She was maybe 3, and she's snuggled up next to me on one side. And Brooklyn, who I guess would have been 8 at the time, was snuggled up on the other side of me. And we're just reading, Ramona and Beezus together. And it's so much fun. I love that. I just have even that picture, that image of this is what we've done. This is our family culture. We read together, and then you get to share in those memories of, walking through books together and stuff. It's so much fun. So much fun. Well, we're out of time again. This time is going by so quickly, but we will be back tomorrow. And tomorrow I do want to talk about, I mentioned this, just raising entrepreneurial homeschoolers and leaders and teaching our kids how to be entrepreneurs, because I know that you have one who has done a really good job with that. Maybe talk a little bit about gap year. I've got one who's coming into her gap year, and maybe a few other things. So we'll see where the Lord takes the conversation, but we do have more to talk about. So we will be back tomorrow. Leigh, tell people one more time where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, you can find pretty much everything at littlebylittlehomeschool.com, or if you are listening right now on a podcast app, you can go ahead and head over to Little by Little Homeschool in your podcast app.
Awesome. We will put links to those in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you are watching this on YouTube, would you please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and then share this podcast with your friends, whether it's the YouTube video or the actual podcast, whatever app you're listening to this on. Share this with your friends so that they can have the encouragement that you are getting as well. We love you guys and are so grateful for those of you who continue to do that. And again, you can find everything Schoolhouse Rocked at our website, schoolhouserocked.com. Stay tuned to the very end to hear what's coming up next on the podcast, and we will see you back here tomorrow. Bye.
A mom said to me one time, "Aren't you worried about sheltering your children?" And I said to her, we care more about sheltering tomato plants in the culture right now than we do about our precious children. And so if someone wants to accuse me of sheltering my children, my answer is always absolutely yes. I will shelter my child until I know my child can stand up against the elements of the culture so that they can grow to maturity. And we slowly begin to remove the shelter from around them as we see that they are mature and that they understand the battle lines around them and can engage the culture from a position of strength rather than weakness.
In the beginning, yes, it was dollar signs. It was looking at the money that I have and looking, even if it was just $300 he made from cutting firewood. And so that really was a big thing. And that's been very intentional. And it's been a lot of my husband speaking into him as well, because especially as teen boys get older, mom is great, but dad really needs to step in and be able to speak to them man to man.